So now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our interviewer this morning, who will be joined in the first half of the morning by authors Sarah Winman, Luke Cassidy and Anne Ingle. A friend to the City Libraries over the years, Niall has edited several anthologies and textbooks, including the Lifeline series, Poetry Now and Windharp, Poems of Ireland since 1916. He writes a weekly art column in the Sunday Independent and broadcasts frequently on RTE Radio 1. And in 2017, he was awarded an honorary Doctorate of Letters by UCD for services to literature. So, Niall, I'm leaving it up to you. Thanks.
Hello everyone and welcome to this wonderful theatre which opened its doors first in 1622. So next year it will be 400 years old. It's obviously been repurposed and renovated since then, but it is wonderful to be in such a place that resonates with creativity. About 20 years ago, at another wonderful Dublin City Libraries Readers' Day, I remember Salman Rushdie reminding us that we are the storytelling species. And apparently, since we began telling stories to each other, 105 billion people have lived on this planet. The 7.9 billion people alive on the planet at the moment continue to tell stories. And this morning, we are in the wonderful company of Sarah Winman, Anne Ingle, and Luke Cassidy. When I read their 3 books, I was reminded of a phrase from E.M. Forster's Howard's End. Personal relations are the important thing forever and ever, not this outer world of anger and telegrams. Telegrams and anger, I think, is what he said. And Emily Dickinson reminds us that there is no frigate like a book to take us lands away. When we read these 3 wonderful books that we're celebrating here this morning, we are brought to Cornwall, to London, to Sandymount Green, to Rush, to the East End of London, to Florence, to Dundalk, to Galway, to Belfast, to Ringaskiddy, to France. So we are brought places, and those places and our being there enrich, sometimes unsettle, and always make reading that absolute pleasure that it really is. We begin with Sarah Winman and her novel, Still Life, which was published earlier this year and is already enjoying its 8th reprint, which is a sign that readers out there value Sarah Winman's work. And I'd like to begin, Sarah, please, by telling you, I've never met you until now, only a moment ago. Having read Still Life, I know 2 things about you.
Oh, go on.
That you must have enjoyed writing that book enormously, and that you must not have voted for Brexit.
I think you've, yes, that is the secret. Yes. First of all, before I go on to that, thank you so much. What a beautiful introduction. Absolutely stunning, and it's really, really lovely to be here and do something live. I did not vote for Brexit. Part of this book, I've never ever thought so consciously about the tone of a book ever before. It's always been something that was very organic. And then after Brexit, and then this sort of hateful rhetoric that was happening, and this incredible lurch to the right, and my country being holed below the waterline, I felt very weighed down by that. I felt very weighed down by the politics, the divisiveness that was happening. And I thought, well, surely an act of resistance could be something like joy. What if we go totally against that? What if we bring people together? What if I decide to go right back to the basics of storytelling and make something entertaining and joyous and light and lift and join people within that space?
And you have that lovely epigraph from Forster,
yes,
where 2 people coming together can create a salvation.
Yeah.
And of course, you have 2 wonderful lead characters. But this novel, it struck me, it's Dickensian in its exuberance and its colourful array of characters. But then you come across a sentence where you read, his handsomeness went direct to her knickers.
Yes.
And you realise that this isn't quite Dickens, that there's a wonderful, fresh, racy, sexual energy to the piece.
Yes.
And thank you. And it's an absolute delight to spend so much time with so many people. It begins in 1944, it moves through 4 decades, and it ends with Evelyn Skinner, one of the main characters, back in 1901 when she is 21. And then it moves 2 pages on and we are in a war cemetery. I mean, it's beautifully modulated. Now, at home at your desk, do you have post-its and do you have a map of Florence and all of those things to help you create such a well-made novel?
I don't really, until I get going, and then I have scraps of paper everywhere. But I'm not a plotter. So every time I've ever thought kind of cerebrally about where I'm going to start with a book, it never happens. So for the last 8 years, I've been saying I'm going to write another first-person narrative. It doesn't happen. And so the process is incredibly organic.
But when you say you haven't got a plot, I can tell you some of the things that happened in this marvellous book. You know, Peg meets so-and-so.
Yes.
And you know, you've got characters who are just so rich in terms of their own living the life.
Yes.
So you must plot in that sense.
I plot as I go along. That's what I mean. So I don't start with, okay, these are the characters, this is where we're going to go, this is how I want them to be. So all my books, I tend to have an ending. So the whole procedure is a little bit cinematic. You know, let's have a real cinematic ending. Roughly the beginning will be opposite to the end.
And was your beginning the beginning in the finished novel?
There was another beginning, but it was unnecessary. So in the editing process, my narrator was taken out.
Oh, goodness.
I know. No, it's a very good move. It was a really, really good move. I didn't mind it, but there was a little section almost of him introducing what was to be. But the actual beginning, so Evelyn and Margaret someone, yeah, it was quite rare for me because I knew where I was going to, I knew what was the beginning of the novel, not the start of the actual novel, but the story, let's say it like that, was when I discovered the flood and when I discovered these young people called Mud Angels. And that's when me and Story met. And then I started to gather a lot of books around me and see, well, what is the time span? What do I want to do? What was Florence's history? Because remember, this is a city I knew nothing about.
But the flood, the disastrous flood, where 18 churches and 15 museums were devastated, that was 1966.
Yeah.
Was that your focus originally in terms of time, but then you went back to 1944?
Yes, so the flood, and then learning, I don't know if anybody knows about this flood, that it devastated the city over a period of 20, the waters came down from the mountains through the Arno for about 24, 36 hours, and it brought a ton of mud, it left a ton of mud for every citizen in the city. And it wasn't just mud, it was mud that was caked with oil and sewage and bodies of cows. You know, it was mucky and had such a devastating effect. So 50,000 were left homeless, 16,000 movable works of art were devastated, most beyond repair, millions of books.
And 30 people died.
Yes, 30 people died, 101 in Tuscany, because this was all over the region. And then what happened was there was no rescuing, there was no help from central government. And they were left on their own for days. And then suddenly these young people these young volunteers from all over the world started coming into the city. And they became known as Mud Angels. And they would clean up works of art and monuments or basically help deliver food to elderly people. And that was the story. That this was the generation after the war generation. And that it was so important, a kind of civic responsibility, that they came into Europe to help and be part of something, this kind of sense of unity. And that was the romance of the story, I think, for me.
You've wonderful names, and they acquire their names through nicknames or Ulysses, whom we'll hear about in a moment, because you've agreed to read a passage, how he got his name. But Evelyn Waugh found his names in a phone book. Where did you find yours?
Mine usually come to me in the mornings. I have a little stretch before I get to the desk. And then then a name pops up. If I'm in the right track, if this is the right story for me, and I only have one story, I don't have lots of stories, I just have the one story, and then I start it. And Ulysses came up first, so Ulysses Temper, and I wanted to play a little bit with his name. But this isn't the first time I've played with names. So a book I wrote called Marvellous, I played with names with that, and the weight of naming, and whether people grow into their name or what a name, how a name affects a person.
And have you ever changed a name? You just gave the character the wrong name and then said, no, this isn't working.
Yeah, I did. The poet, Constance Everly.
Right.
She was something else. I can't remember what she was. I think she was Constance Walker, but I quite liked Constance Everly.
Well, Everly is such a beautiful lyrical riff on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't often, they do arrive. They kind of, these names do arrive, and then I just, I think, yeah, that works.
Now, your background is acting.
Yeah.
And you're a wonderful reader of your work. So would you please read us an extract from the very early pages?
Sure, I'd love to. So I'm reading from the first meeting, really, between Evelyn, this aging art historian and possible spy, and Ulysses Temper, who is a young soldier and globe maker. And it's wartime, it's 1944, and they've just met on this Tuscan roadside, and now they're driving off towards a villa. The rogue shelling that had accompanied the afternoon had ceased, and a soft, almost believable peace lay across the wooded hills and hilltop refuges, across the dark symmetry of vines that terraced the slopes. Ulysses lit a cigarette. "So," said Evelyn, "tell me a little. London, 24, married, no kids." Evelyn laughed. "Oh, you've done this before. Got to be quick, right? Could be dead tomorrow. You?" "Oh, Kent, 64, unmarried, childless. And what of life before all this?" "Globes," he said. "Dad made 'em and I sold 'em. Then he died and I just made 'em." "Oh, you made the world turn. Find a Temper and Son globe and you'll find my mum's name hidden somewhere on the surface." "A town called?" she asked. "Nora." "Oh, how romantic. Nice, right? You and Peggy like that?" "Nah, me and Peg are the opposite. Left to me, I'd name stars after her. We got married on a bender. Only way we could do it. When she woke up and saw the ring, she punched me in the face. Happiest day of my life, though. Then I joined the army and we're strangers again." "Oh, don't you write to one another?" He shook his head. "We know what we're both up to," he said. "Thing is, it's always been us when the others have left. Always that spark when the lights have gone out. Is that love?" "Oh, don't look at me. I've not stayed long on that particular horse." "Never?" "Once or twice, maybe. Once is enough. We just need to know what the heart's capable of, Evelyn. And do you know what it's capable of?" "I do. Grace and fury." Evelyn smiled and drew heavily on her cigarette. "So that," and she pointed to his lip, "was Peg and not a sniper." No. That was definitely a sniper. "Look," he said, and he raised his right arm and showed the scar along his wrist. "Shrapnel," he said. He leant towards her and parted his hair. "Sniper," he said. He pulled up his trouser leg. Evelyn winced. "Artillery fire. That one got infected. And then this." And he unbuttoned his shirt. "Good Lord," said Evelyn. "Another near miss?" "A lucky escape," he said. "There's a difference." "How so?" "It's all mental. How I see life at the time. This last one was in Trieste, and there's been nothing since. And now I know I'm not going to die, and I'm a lot happier." "Excuse me?" said Evelyn. "Not die here, I mean. Italy here. War here," he said. "It's like having a debt hanging over you. You know it will be called in, but it's how it's going to get called in. That's the question. What I mean is, all those opportunities to kill me off. I'm still here. There's a reason for that." "Poor aim might be one," said Evelyn. "You're funny, Evelyn, and you're a very optimistic young man." "I am," he said. "I'm glad you noticed that." And he went on to explain that his optimism came from his father, Wilbur, whose wise counsel of "life's what you make it, son," had been firmly entrenched in him from a young age. The man was a dreamer, he said, had a loser's luck and a winning smile, and was never happy unless he had a churn in his guts
that denoted money riding on an outcome, a feeling he often equated to love. But then one day it happened for real. He walked into the pub, stood on a table and declared he'd fallen head over heels, and everyone thought she'd be some tidy young thing, but she wasn't. She was almost as old as him, slipping down the other side of 50, tired, kind-faced, with the keenest blue eyes that looked at him as if he was a meadow of wildflowers. And 2 months later, against all odds, she told him they were having a child, a first for both. The most beautiful words in the world, said Ulysses. Having a child, said Evelyn, against all odds. This recognition of double luck, wife and kid incubating, brought back a familiar taste to Wilbur Temper, like sucking on a coin. And his palms are tingling, said Ulysses, the soles of his feet too. And he knows this feeling because it's a winning feeling, and you can never let a winning feeling pass because that would go against nature. So, he goes to my mum and explains what he needs to do. Last time, she says, last time, he promises. Now, his mate Cressy has told him about this illegal greyhound meeting out in Essex, all hush-hush and big money. And they go out there together and study form, and he scribbles in his notebook a beautiful constellation of numbers, subtractions, additions, and an algebraic formula of luck. Last race. Everything on the black. That's what he used to say. All or nothing. And he places life and savings on a tan and white dog called Ulysses Boy at 100 to 1. The rest is folklore. Dog came in first, thus ensuring two things. Enough money to set up a modest business in handmade globes and a memorable name for his sole son and heir. You were named after a greyhound, said Evelyn. A winning greyhound, Evelyn. Winning.
Well done, well done. Fate, chance and great good luck play a very important part in your novel, not only in the naming of Ulysses, but in the Dutch athlete and in the World Cup hat-trick. Do they matter in your own life? Or are you just giving it to your fiction?
Oh, I think they do matter. I don't know if there's too many coincidences. I think there's just timing. There is a perfect timing when something happens, and we can put whatever name we like on it.
But when Des, the self-made millionaire in your novel, discovers about Peg and Glenn, he says, you couldn't write it, could you?
No,
and
but
you write it.
No, I do write it. Part of my contract with the reader of writing an entertaining story, a joyous story, was flagging moments that actually probably goes against the teaching of plot. I didn't want anything bad to happen to them. And that was really important. The only difficulty or the heartbreak would be the natural process of life.
But there is a world war and there is a disastrous flood.
There is.
But they take background.
They do, because what war and what flood actually did was bring a togetherness. And that's what happens. If you go through something horrendous within a community, it's a bonding. We've just had it, haven't we? So it's proof of that. And I think the flood, when Ulysses is over there, he's still struggling to be accepted. It's a very insular society. And there is a moment when the flood happens, and then they all start helping each other, or they start cleaning up. And the fact that his hardship is the same as everybody else's changes his life and the life of him living there.
But then you sprinkle great good fortune on him.
Yeah, I do. Again, I wanted them. This is also about class and opportunity. And I wanted these people to have good fortune. That's part of opportunity for me with them. And again, for me, they'd had the struggle.
There's a wonderful interaction as well between Evelyn Skinner, lecturer in art history, and the autodidact Cress, or the working class people from the pub, Coll's Pub in the East End. So you speak about people coming together in crisis, whatever. But another thing I really loved about this book is that there's hardly a conventional family in it, and yet wonderful groupings are created and they support each other. The pleasure of being in Tuscany and in Firenze was just delicious in the reading of the novel. Did you go to spend much time in Florence?
I was there over 2 years, so I think I probably was there for about six times, and the major time was in January 2019, and I was there for a month.
And did you go specifically because you were setting a novel there?
Yes, so when I first learned about the flood, that was 2015, but I was already set to write a different novel. And then I spent about 2 years trying to push the idea of a Florentine novel away, because did we need another novel set in Florence, quite frankly? And also, I didn't know Florence, and I've only ever written about places that I know, and I found it a little bit overwhelming to see, well, what am I going to say about Florence that hasn't been said? And then it was at that point that I started to go back to Forster's novel and Forster's film.
And Forster is in it.
He is in it. And I mean, I suppose Forster is in it. Let me just say, so I came to the film before I came to the book. And that was because my acting agent, so way back in the 80s, had 3 major stars in the film. So it's a big talking point.
Okay.
Then I read Forster's novel, so, many, many years ago. And they're very different beasts. And the one thing that I loved within this, and it is a dark novel, and it's a very erotic novel, actually, is about, sacred versus the profane, educated versus the not, life of the spirit. Who has the right to talk about art? And I loved this sort of held backness, and there are these little moments of queerness in it. And then I started to think, and then I learned, that this pensione that he was writing about, the Bertolini, was actually a pensione simi, and did exist, and there was a Cockney landlady. And he spent a year travelling with his mother to Italy. And I then started to read his letters back home, because I was just very intrigued about what this year-long journey was about and what he actually thought about this boarding house. And I thought, well, Forster can't write the novel he wants to write because he's a gay man at a time when homosexuality is illegal. And you get little clues. And the only time he did write a gay novel, it was going to be published after his death. And I thought, well, what is the celebration of me as a gay writer? What do I have today? And not everyone in the world has it, but I have it in my country, is the freedom. And so you were talking about the sauciness or the very, at the beginning about the sexuality, and that's what I can give. And so I wanted Forster there. I wanted to bring my lovely gay character, Evelyn, in her 20s, early 20s, who is she's having a first sexual affair. What would happen if she came face to face with this writer? And that a lot of the things that she said to him ended up going in A Room with a View.
The Tin Man, an earlier novel, also explored queer identity, but it's much more open and celebratory in this one.
Yeah.
I mean, Evelyn and Livia, my goodness, their Italian lessons led to all kinds of beautiful encounters.
Yes.
And nowadays there are people, publishers have sensitivity readers, which seems to me preposterous. Were you ever uneasy about having explicit sex scenes? There aren't many, but there are some in the novel.
No, not at all. I loved it. I loved writing them. I thought it was a celebration. And you're right, the difference between Tin Man and this novel, but they are very different novels. Tin Man is really centered around the AIDS epidemic, and how, the hatred of the 80s and how difficult it was. And there are many novels like that. I came out in the 80s. And there are many novels of struggle. But I believe at some point, maybe where I am now, what I need to write is about aspiration. That we are aspiring to a way of life and a way of being that is possible And it is actually, it's not this strange utopia, it is within arm's reach.
Or within the novel, it's realised as well.
It is
I mean,
realised.
Alice, the most precocious child in fiction, I would suggest. I mean, at 8 years of age. I mean, her relationship with Romy is wonderful. It's open and free. And even Mr. Collins and Massimo. I loved that you brought us to Massimo's island as well.
Yes.
I mean, I love so many things about this book. I didn't know the word gore until I read it, which is a triangular piece of paper necessary in the making of the globe. Rapography. And rapography is a reference to the apparently trivial things in life, and such trivial things are sometimes included in the term still life.
Yes.
Vanessa Bell says something wonderfully interesting about still life. Because she was a woman and because she was confined to the home very often, the still life was a very feminine world for her, but it was as important as the big boys going out painting the big scenes. Why did you call it still life?
Very, very similar to what you're talking about. So still life was to bring in this idea of this genre painting and this interior world. And also still as quiet life. You know, this of course there is plot, but it was really to be the gentleness of the unfolding of 40 decades of these people's lives. And building on what you said about Vanessa Bell, so I read a book by Norman Bryson called Looking at the Overlooked, 4 essays on still life painting. And his last essay, I think it is about still life and the feminine space. And it's a brilliant essay. And so still life as a genre painting was always looked down upon because it wasn't figurative. So those at the time, you know, the sort of the privileged and the knowledgeable always thought that it was trivial. Inanimate objects, very common objects that have been handed down for centuries that we're very familiar with, usually in a kitchen, domestic scenes. So what would be termed a woman's world. So the biggest put down that you could actually say. I'm going to now shift it into an energy rather than a genre space. So he argues, Bryson argues, that actually the power of still life is because of this feminine space and is because of the triviality. Because what it is a celebration of habits that maintain life. And so it's feasting, and it's bringing people together, and it's memory, and it's continuity. And he said, sometimes in still life painting, you get these very ridiculous moments where, you'll have a telescope or a male hat, and it's purely there to sort of diminish the feminine space. And it's utterly ridiculous. And he says, this is the power. And as I'm reading this essay, I go, that's my book. My book is a feminine space. So let's move away from genre, because feminine energy can exist in male and in the female. And it's a particular energy. And it's a caring energy, and it's a cherishing energy, and it's a listening energy, and it's a creative energy. And what I wanted, as I'm talking about the aspiration of how one can live life, was I wanted to write solely about good men. And these good men embrace this feminine space and this feminine energy, and you find them in the kitchen, you find them bringing up the children, and you find them conversing with nature. Because how we treat women is how we treat nature. And when one starts to change, the other will change. And that's really what is represented with Cressy and him in conversing with the trees.
Talk to me about Ulysses and Darnley. It's one of the most beautiful relationships in the book. And I'm not spoiling anything if I say Darnley dies very early on.
Yeah.
Why did you create that?
Because it was wartime was a time of equalizing. And so you would have people from different classes.
But Captain Darnley, I mean, Ulysses loves him.
Yeah, they love each other, and that's it. That there is this common ground of meeting that in life probably wouldn't have happened, and that's what I mean. That wartime brought this intensity of friendship that crossed class, but also importantly, Darnley is the educator. So I'm dealing with many characters in this book who didn't have a big education.
But I think I learned more from Chris, who is an autodidact. I mean,
Yes.
he tells me that lightning does strike twice. He tells me what the Gothard Pass. I mean, I loved being told things, and it wasn't in a showy off way.
No.
It was really part of the character of Chris, that you were sharing so many interesting details. I love that as well in the book. But you do say in the book, sorrow ran tributary to beauty. So, and you also say, the oldest story in the world, grief. Just a lot of fucking grief. And yet it's on the side of life, and it's joyous. So, I mean, in your own life, has there been much sorrow and grief?
It's a very good question. I think I'm sort of classically middle-aged now. So I've lost people, People have died. People I love have died. Some have died before their time and others have had long lives. And I suppose that's what I'm saying, that you can't escape it. If you're going to live a full life and if you're going to love, you're going to feel pain, because that's the endurance and that's the deal. That's the deal we make with living.
I think the Queen, when 9/11 happened, said that grief is the price we pay for love.
Yes, absolutely.
That it's unavoidable.
It is, but we also have other little griefs. Dreams not happening the way we want them. Missing out on an opportunity, a relationship breaking down. And I don't think we necessarily honour those grieves. They can build up. And we do need to honour those grieves. We're incredibly sensitive as a species. We feel things.
Yeah. Food plays a very important part in the novel. We get a recipe for carbonara, the right way to make carbonara.
No, it's definitely the right way, yes.
And we also get wonderful descriptions about the rape of the Saiban women or the deposition painting. Did you do a lot of research, or is that just part of the course you took at the National Gallery?
No, the one at the National Gallery was very, very basic. It was just as an interest thing, and that was way back in 2015. I knew how I wanted to write about art, so my response to it, but it didn't feel good enough for a novel. So it needed to be pitched right. So it needed to be maybe information that most readers wouldn't have, but it also didn't need to be in a kind of an academic vein that would exclude, because the whole point about this book is the inclusion within art. So, no, I was struggling, and I will tell you a little story. So I did know about, I'd seen the statue, the Rape of the Sabre. I mean, it's the most stunning statue.
I Googled it.
Oh my
I didn't
goodness.
know it, and I Googled it.
It is, you feel that it is flesh. It's this single slab of marble that is carved with no fixed viewpoint, so you're supposed to walk around it. It's stunning. I needed an art historian, and I was having some acupuncture. I have told this story, so forgive anyone who has heard it. But but this is how it happened. This was my chance meeting with fate. And the acupuncturist was Italian. And she said, "How are you doing?" I went, "Oh my goodness, it's awful. My protagonist is an art historian. I have no idea what to write. I have no idea what to say. And time is running out." And she goes, "What would you like if you could have anything?" I went, "Oh, that's really easy. I want somebody who went to Florence during the flood. I want an art historian, Anglo-English, so we don't have problem with language. And I want her still to be there and still, writing books on art history." She goes, "Okay." And she went on her phone. And it goes, bing, a few more needles. She goes, hold on. And I went, "Okay, I will." Bing, okay, a few more needles. "Tonight, you will have a message from Monica." I went, "Okay." Tonight came and there was an email. And they'd found me an art historian who went to Florence during the flood, who is still there, who is Anglo-American, and who is still writing papers. Her name is Stella Rudolph. She's waiting for you, and I was flying to Florence the next day.
Good.
And I had 2 years of friendship with her. And she was the one. It took me a while, because, her thinking, and when she was working with attribution, it is a very academic process. And it took me a little while to get through to that beautifully eccentric, fantastic woman. And then I started to ask her these questions. And the answers that I got were just beautiful, were just in the space that I needed it to be, that, you might, as you were saying, I learned things, but it wasn't in the realm that it was just too inaccessible.
Oh, they didn't stick out at all. They were woven into the narrative so effortlessly that you felt you were being given a gift of recognising art, the value of art. Who's your favourite character in the novel?
I love Evelyn. Again, aspiration, if I get to be an older person, I'd like to.
And you allow her to live until 99?
I do. I do, yeah. But that was also down to, how far was this novel going to go on for? And people told me, do not go near the 90s. Politics in Italy was awful. In fact, if you could pull it back into mid-80s, and then I was getting very close to her 100th, and I said, we'll cut it off here.
Okay.
So,
and what are you working on now? Because this novel is kind of, in your past, isn't it? Even though it's just been published. Yeah. A writer, submits a novel, it takes a long time for it to be printed up and everything.
Yeah.
So what's your world now?
I'm not writing anything. It's still actually very much my present, because usually what would happen, the book would be published and I'd be on the road for quite a bit. And I find that, I recognise it as being part of the process. Mm-hmm. That you travel, you talk about it, you get tired, you travel, you talk about it, you get tired. So by the time it's done, you have space for something new, or I do, because I've done it, I've talked about it so much. And it hasn't happened this time. And I haven't really moved away from the familiar or the domestic space as much as I used to. And I find travelling or just being in a very different city very creatively inspiring. So that whole process is a bit new, and I'm not sure what to do with it, but I'm not writing at the moment at all.
Art is central to this novel, and art played a very interesting part when Dora chose the painting over the bottle of whiskey and the Tin Man. Yeah. Who's your favourite artist?
Ooh. That's such a good question, and I've got a blank, actually, because it's too wide. I really do have a blank.
But
as far as Renaissance, I would say Caravaggio and Filippo Lippi. There is that sort of tenderness and that drama, and certainly Caravaggio, that very cinematic kind of. Oh my goodness! I love Cézanne. I love Cézanne still lifes. Oh gosh, I'm going to be ribbed for this afterwards, but never mind. Never mind. What's yours, by the way?
My favourite artist.
Okay.
Well, actually, this is a very odd answer, but the little watercolours by Elizabeth Bishop. I love them.
Okay.
And I love her poetry more, but I mean, her little watercolours, there's one of gravestones in Florida. It's just exquisite. But I love the biggies, Matisse. I love Vanessa Bell. I think she's a marvellous, that whole Bloomsbury set. I love Dora Carrington. Yeah. I was reading about recently. But yes, I mean, it's a silly and foolish question that I asked. But hey, Now, book into film or TV series, would you like that to happen?
Yes, definitely. Sales are great.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it, how a film will send people back to the book. They'll then read the book if they haven't read it already.
No, it's a win-win, because if the film is bad, people then go, oh, you should read the book, it's better. And then if the film is really good, people go, oh my goodness, I've got to read the book.
Yeah.
So,
and do you miss acting?
I miss the idea of acting, and I love actors. And I go to the theatre a lot more than when I was sort of theoretically an actor. And I still get nervous that half hour beforehand, knowing that they've just had their half-hour call. I'm very much in touch with the actor that I was. I'm in touch with the young person who went to drama school and whose life was about to change because of this artistic path. And it did change my life. And that's why I want to write so vividly about the sphere of art and how life-changing it can be.
And when you're writing at home in your quiet room, or maybe you listen to music, do you speak aloud the lines?
I do. I think it's a good way to be familiar with your voice. It's a very good way to keep the realness, you know, of what you're writing and how you want to write something. And there is a rhythm. There is a rhythm to how I write each page. And the emphasis on that. I wouldn't call it necessarily poetry, that's a bit too, it's going a bit too far, but there is definitely a rhythm. And I find it's interesting that if you go through the editing process and some of the words are taken out, or I might have put the wrong word in, my understanding of that word, then when I do the audiobook, I will stumble over that sentence.
Right.
Because it's not organic.
Yeah. We have 5 minutes, so we could invite a question from the audience if one were to raise a hand and speak up. Any questions from the audience? Oh, yes, there's one here.
I did. I did the audio, and I'm lucky. I've done all of them, and I do like doing them. It is that little moment where it sort of bridges with the old life. But this one was hard. It was hard work, and I couldn't have done it without the sort of director and sound technician, Dave Smith, and he was brilliant, because there are times when you're doing it hour after hour, and it's almost as if your lips freeze up, or your tongue becomes very big, and he's always there with sort of little exercises or things, or just having somebody the other side of the glass to just go, come on, keep going. No. Oh, I hope you enjoy it.
And when you're writing, I know you like Toni Morrison, Zora Neale Hurston, Colin Tobin, John McGahern, but when you're writing, do you read others, or do you just block out other voices in your head?
I read the ones that have always inspired me. So, because sometimes you need to be reminded why you're still doing it. You know, that there is life beyond this really tough patch of writing. But I won't necessarily go out and buy a new book. I won't introduce myself, because I do find it a little bit distracting. You know, if I'm having a tough time and it's third-person narrative, and I pick up a book that's, say, first-person narrative, I can be very vulnerable and think, why aren't I writing first-person narrative? So it's not helpful. But I will pick up the books that have always been there, that are so high, that I've placed them so high on that pedestal, that they will always thrill and they will always delight, and then I will always feel, oh my goodness, this is why I do it, because of this power and this incredible moment that you have with words.
Your work has reached a global audience. What sense do you have of readers here, there, and everywhere?
I get messages. You know, that's what I like. So it's a very one-to-one. I get messages might get messages on, direct messages on social media, or I get letters. Letters find me, or I'll have emails sent to my agent and forwarded. And it's those moments, because the other is rather abstract. You know, when they give you numbers of books sold, and that's amazing, but it's just a little bit, I can't really imagine it. But I do feel that letter where somebody writes and says, oh my goodness, you know, I was going through a really hard time and I picked up your book. And then you just go, oh well, that's job done, isn't it? Really?
I have 1 minute left.
Okay.
I'm just remembering an article in The Guardian recently where they say yet again, oh, men don't read fiction, women read fiction, men read serious stuff like history and biography. I mean, why is that? Why do men really not involve themselves in the wonderful world of fiction?
Oh, I think it goes back to all the TED Talk. Vulnerability.
Emotion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Allowing that, and what I mentioned is along the way, you know, the light and dark of it, that fiction isn't serious, that it can't be serious, because we're dealing with a great big emotional if, and also having to put yourself in someone else's position, and men don't often like to do that.
And in fiction, of course, there are great truths.
Yes.
On that note, I say to Sarah Winman, congratulations and multe grazie.
Oh, prego.